What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Mo Love Podcast, Honest Conversations with Mo. Back at it, here with another episode. And I'll just get right into this episode. Then with the first topic of this episode is on self accountability and kind of what that entails, what that looks like for myself, and how we try to depict that within our own lives. As I spoke on last episode, kind of spoke on self loss and what it means to lose yourself and how do you go about finding yourself. But I think it's also important to kind of be aware of how are you accountable for yourself in terms of that, whether it is self loss or just overall growth within yourself. And I guess to start off with, what self accountability is for me is, you know, doing my best every day to, get 1% better. And I speak on that a lot in terms of being 1% better and how that looks like, and putting in the necessary work to achieve, you know, the dreams that I have for myself, the ideas that started out as dreams and manifesting them, and putting the work in and turning them into reality. And I think that's what accountability looks like in terms of all aspects of my life, whether that's, the physical in terms of, how am I taking care of myself, not, overexerting myself, to the mental, what knowledge, what information am I allowing myself to intake that makes me, that much better. And in terms of, what accountability can entail, it can entail, the good and bad, the things that I've chosen not to be accountable for, whether that's that negative self-talk and getting down on myself, or not feeling up for it or up to the task when it comes to the goals I want to achieve. And sometimes every day is a daily battle for sure, and I think that's the struggle in holding yourself accountable, and how that changes and how that shapes itself is multi-layered, very multi-layered, because if we're not holding ourselves accountable, no one else can, no one else can. And we have to be accountable in the choices we choose to make, whether it is the good or bad, and accepting the outcomes that come from it. And with being accountable, it's a evolving process, because um, when we choose to make the choices for ourselves, for our lives, and the decisions we choose to make, um, I think it's important to notice, are we taking accountability for those things? Are we, despite the end result, are we saying, hey, regardless, this is where, in the moment where I am and who I am, and this is how I choose to proceed from here, whether it's bad habits, whether, it is that negative self-talk, whether it is that, toxic positivity. It's a ever, evolving process, because our ownership in ourselves and who we choose to become is very much, a state where we're kind of we're kind of shape shift. We're always kind of shape shifting, we're always growing, we're always, developing as individuals. And what aspects of ourselves have we chosen to accept, and what aspects of ourselves are we choosing to get rid of, you know, in that understanding of, being accountable and taking that ownership. And that comes also through, as I touch on next, through the traumas that we endure, within our lives, and what kind of is trauma, and how do we allow trauma to seep into the fabrics of our lives, when it comes to childhood trauma and what we've been through, the things we've chosen to hide, our shadow selves, the parts of ourselves that we've chosen to hide, um, is very, very important, because in understanding who are we choosing to become, what traumas are we allowing to dictate our choices, and what is it about our traumas that is impacting us now. um, for example, I think I've touched on before, as far as, I think the biggest trauma for myself is in terms of my physical health, in terms of my heart condition, and being born with my heart on the other side, and how that kind of impacted, whether it be my confidence or the manner in which I am able to engage in the world physically, as far as how that impacts my overall health, and never really understanding how much that kind of played a role into how I carried myself, early on, in the sense of where, kind of not really being able to be the individual, I guess, I felt I could be, not in the sense of where this heart condition, prevented me from obviously doing the things I probably wanted to do, or enjoy doing, but I think just how it, impacted my relationships, you know, with people, because I want to do so much, but understanding, my limitations. And I think that was something I had to, kind of grasp early on, and later on, and realizing how much that did play a role, as I mentioned, in terms of my confidence, because I was, so sheltered growing up, because, this heart condition, something, very unknown, to my family. So the in the freedom in which I try to, flow through life, kind of was impacted, because when you're young, you feel, of course, feeling invincible, and feeling, like there's, no consequences, in the world. But I think understanding how much that allowed me to get a better understanding of myself and my abilities and my capabilities, was very much needed. And then other traumas, in terms of, whether, it's family, whether it's, relationships, that, I've gone through, those traumas, and how that shaped me as well. And then also I think about the trauma that we, cause onto others, and how that impacts us. And when we look at what those traumas, that we place others in, or put ourselves through, tell us about ourselves. And obviously, knowing that we all have a story, knowing we all have something to tell, we all have a story to tell, is very vital in understanding, ourselves, and what we choose to do, and how we choose to proceed, in life, despite, our traumas, despite the circumstances, placed against us. And in understanding, how painful experiences really shape us. I think sometimes we try to hide ourselves from pain, because we feel, pain is a bad thing. And in a sense, pain is needed to really learn and grow and shed parts of ourselves that we no longer want to be and no longer want to see. And I think that's the important thing too, in understanding how do we kind of grow from our painful experiences. Like I've been outside three major surgeries kind of in my life. Of course, my heart surgery when I was 4 years old, that forced my family to move from Kenya to the US, getting my heart surgery in Atlanta. Then I had another surgery because I still had, from the surgery when I was 4, I still had one like last remaining hole in my heart. And I had that surgery in 7th grade. I want to say, so I was probably about like 13, 14. And then last major surgery was when I was, what was it, sophomore year, or junior year of high school. And I had a perforated eardrum in my right ear. And, those, understanding, how the different things I learned about myself, throughout those surgeries, not, taking life for granted. And also, being comfortable, in just who I am. And I think, like, for instance, like when it comes to like my ear surgery, and, I, I'm the guy who will probably more often times than not will say, a lot. That's not, that's obviously because, I had a, hole in my right ear. So on the right side, not the best hearing on that side, but also understanding that that allows me to, okay, take a step back and really, do my best to listen and, um, re-ask, or to be unafraid to ask, someone to repeat themselves. And I think sometimes we feel like we feel like, oh, if I have to repeat myself, we feel like that becomes an issue, because, you want to, you obviously do want to take in the information the first time that you hear it. But I think also being unafraid to be like, to have someone repeat themselves is also important too. So I think of that as well in terms of how that kind of shaped me, in terms of my, listening skills, in terms of, how I choose to communicate, how I choose to, connect with people, in terms of, my heart condition. You know, I always felt, I guess, at times, because of just always learning, the ins and outs of my heart condition, dextrocardia. Um, and, everything's kind of, like a mirror image of itself. Obviously, having, multiple holes in my heart. So I felt like it was things in my life that I was trying to fill, in a sense, also in that way too. And, filling, quote unquote, those, holes in my heart, or just how I choose to, so I have three chambers. So I'm missing, you're supposed to have 4 chambers of your heart. So I'm missing a chamber. I think it's my left ventricle. Is that the one with oxygen? Is that the one that pumps oxygen? But so, but just understanding that also. So I think, even in the sense of understanding the anatomy of my heart and my heart condition, was vital in how I chose to, let it impact, or learn to, grow beyond it and become, become who I am today, and understanding, those different aspects of myself. And then, um, just, I guess, also knowing, kind of early on when I was young to kind of touch back on, kind of what is trauma, um, how excluded I kind of, almost felt from the world because I just, pinpointed at this, one issue, whether it was, my heart condition, whether it was, physically when it came to, my height and stature, and kind of, alienated myself and kind of, withdrew myself from the world and, really not really doing a, disservice to myself and, to the people around me. And also understanding that too, because knowing how much I do care and how much I do, you know, knowing who I'm choosing to become was vital in understanding that too, because I think oftentimes it's easy to alienate ourselves. And I think, just taking accountability in that, and understanding, how I pushed people away because of that. So in terms of, accountability and what that looks like, it's it's ever evolving, it's ever growing, and also being aware of what we're choosing to, of course, be accountable of. And then I guess from earlier this week, I think to the introductory press conference of my Falcons' newest head coach. The Falcons' newest head coach. I said my Falcons, but Falcons' newest head coach and Raheem Morris. And how he kind of talked about during his introductory press conference on the aspect of, the 2016, 2016 loss in the Super Bowl to the Patriots, blowing that game 28-3, and the lessons he learned since then. Obviously, of course, going on to win in Los Angeles with the Rams, with Sean McVay and that whole group, and that organization, and just all the aspects of how he chooses to get rid of, that almost that mark, that scar that is, on that was on the team, the identity of the team, and saying, we're no longer that team. And obviously, it's going to take time, and how he, with him and Terry Fontenot and how they shape the image of, the Atlanta Falcons moving forward with the talent that we do have on the roster, is obviously going to be interesting. But I think when we look at trauma in the sense in that aspect, like I could think back to it like that day, how I was, third quarter feeling good, talking trash to folks as far as like, hey, about to be Super Bowl champs, and then the hurt that was felt was tough, because I think that trauma even impacted how I chose to love my Falcons moving forward, in the sense of I felt like, oh, this was our identity, this is who we were, and were we ever gonna, of course, get over the hump and, win a Super Bowl. So when I even think of that and how, because obviously, I talk to you guys a lot about how much I love, my Lakers, but I never really get into just how much, I love my Falcons as well. But I think that loss in 2016 really impacted that, to a degree, because I felt, like, dang, we had our chance, we had our moment, and, we blew it. And then, of course, in the years preceding after that loss, where, we had, throughout, different coaching regimes, where it still was intrinsically, a part of us. And I think Raheem touching on the fact that, that, because he was there in 2016 and what that looked like, and how he felt, you know, being at the mountaintop and, almost tasting it, but then just, one slip and completely, falling off the cliff. I think that's that accountability piece of how he chooses to work with, Terry Fontenot, uh, Greg Zeedles, Arthur Blank, and the whole, overall, organization from, the coaches he hires to, the players that we choose to, bring on, the players that we do currently have, and how we choose to build the team to reshape that identity is very, very important. And in terms of, what that entails is going to be interesting to watch moving forward. And I'm excited to watch the Raheem Morris regime, and seeing, the energy he exudes, the passion, the the way he's authentically himself at all times. And I just noticed it, briefly, just from a 1 hour press conference. So, and obviously, understanding Coach Morris's experience, from his time with the Falcons and, during his other pressers. But I think really, I think he talked about during his first stint as a head coach, obviously with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. When was that? Dang, that was so long ago. But during his first stint, he was 32 years old. He talked about, when you're, that young, 32, you feel like you have all the answers, and you eventually realize you don't have all the answers, and allowing, other voices to, provide their input and create, a collaborative and communicative, environment that kind of shapes us, and kind of shapes, your identity, and allows you to grow in the different knowledge you choose to intake. And I think and I can kind of relate to that in the sense of that accountability piece in terms of, who am I choosing to become, and who do I want to become, and how am I exuding that through the choices I'm making, and who I am, allowing, or who am I surrounding myself around. So I think it's very, it was a lot of insight just from, he told from that standpoint during his, lessons learned during his time in Tampa Bay to when he moved on. Obviously, coaching both sides of the ball with the Falcons, getting that experience to his time with the Rams, and the different teams, almost, the different teams that the Rams had at the time. You go from, Super Bowl winner to almost kind of like a mini rebuild to, a bunch of young guys, and, pushing them to, obviously get to the playoffs this past year, or earlier this year. So I think it's instrumental as we look at the things around us, and how we choose to connect to that, to related to how we choose to be accountable within our own lives, is very important. And I guess next on the accountability piece I'll touch on, is when it comes to, my Los Angeles Lakers. Obviously, the NBA trade deadline's tomorrow. Tomorrow's probably going to be, or trade deadline on February 8th. Tomorrow, but February 8th, in the sense of tomorrow's, of course, the Kobe, statue unveiling, and we played the Denver Nuggets. But in terms of like the trade deadline, and the identity of the Los Angeles Lakers moving forward, this trade deadline is going to be interesting because LeBron James, of course, will be a free agent this offseason. If he chooses, of course, to opt out, pending if Bronny comes enters the draft this year. And depending on what Braun does, how do we choose to, move forward with Anthony Davis? And then, understanding even the kind of trauma guys on our roster that we currently have, like D'Lo, who's been, traded around the league and, back, in the trade rumors again. And, uh, and Torian Prince, and guys, on, those tradable contracts that, can get moved around. And then what are we, looking to get in return? So is this year a year where we're, chasing, banner 18 or going after banner 18, or is this a year where we're just gonna stand put and just let the cart stand pat, come this trade deadline, and let the cards fall where they may, and then how do we proceed, moving forward as an organization? And I think, that accountability, obviously comes from, the top down, Jeannie Buss, Rob Pelinka, Darvin Ham, and players, so on and so forth. So it's going to be interested moving forward what my Lakers choose to do. Obviously, this trade deadline on what, like I said, it's going to be a tough day because, man, those, just to, it's even funny that thing of, I guess when I even think of, Kobe, the loss of Kobe Bryant and, that tragic day on, January 26, 2020, where 8 others, obviously, lost their lives, including Kobe, and nine people total, losing their lives that day, and how that experience kind of, almost shaped the world, how that impacted me, moving forward in terms of, obviously, I didn't, obviously didn't know Kobe personally or nothing like that, but always, my childhood idol, the guy I admired, the guy I looked up to, the man he was and the man I looked up to in that sense, and really understanding, the lessons that, he was looking to teach and pass forward, onto the world, and really understand, kind of what the Mamba mentality really meant, what that really looked like. And, taking that hurt and not necessarily dwelling on it, because from, obviously from what we saw of who Kobe was, whether it was on the court or off the court, he was always, focused on the mission, focused on, the end goal and the task at hand, whether that was, winning championships or winning an Oscar, when he was, writing his book, or writing, the children's series, the Dear Basketball movie, etc. So many different layers, his investments, with Body Armor, and what he chose to invest in, and how he chose to, allow that to shape himself. So I think moving forward, that's just what I chose to embody, and how those lessons, from, watching Kobe, whether it was on the court, off the court, and in business and just overall life, from afar, of course, but really getting a grasp on who he was as a person, and obviously not, doing, obviously, knowing who he was as a person, but also, really what aspects within myself that I can take from, that I obviously learned from myself, even from, his passing, understanding that, I think the thing that hurt most about, Kobe's passing for me was like the realization that, my childhood was over, since like I said, my childhood idol, and, really entering, kind of that adulthood, and it really like, obviously, I was an adult then, but I think really it just dawned on me like, dang, you know, you see, you really see, the falling of your childhood idols, and how much they impacted you, and how do you, choose, to, take what you learned from them, and what you you chose to gain from them to better you as an individual. So like I said, tomorrow's gonna be tough. It's gonna be exciting, see what 24 and 8 statute, uh, what that'll look like. I think they said they were doing 2 statues. But yeah, it's gonna be exciting, man. And I guess not to to be too somber, I guess. But like that even comes back to kind of what I said in terms of that painful experience. I remember just we like I had, it was hard because it was like, dang, I was going to meet a good friend of mine that I've known since elementary school. No, not middle school. I've known since middle school. And really like really grasp, think back to, the conversations we had, in the lunchroom, LeBron, versus Kobe, that thing I spoke on before. I don't know if I spoke on it, but, used to be a LeBron hater, because of how much, the respect and admiration that I had for Kobe Bryant, the love that I had for Kobe and his game, and, what he embodied and what he exuded, and really just doing my best to, I guess, carry that forward and create, my own version of the Mamba mentality, and not, trying to replicate what, obviously what he represented, but doing my best to just in my own way, to create a piece of, my own Mamba mentality and what that looks like for myself. And just, understanding what traumas in my life, have impacted me, and how I choose to grow from it and choose to become this version of myself as I, grow every day and become a different version of myself every day. And ultimately, the version that I can hold accountable to who I am. And I guess to move on, I guess beyond that somber note, to get into, more of the 2024, NFL playoffs. Obviously, a few weeks ago, we had the AFC Championship and NFC Championship, and the different to, think, or even the week prior in the divisional round, think back, on the trauma of, the hurt I felt for, Buffalo Bills fan when, dang, I knew Kier's name, but it's not crossing my mind right now for the Bills. But him, obviously missing, that field goal and the words wide right, popping up, or being a trigger almost for, Bills fan, and understand, that history, that just that word that, that has on their, that franchise, that overall team. And their loss to the Chiefs that day in the divisional round. But as I said, the AFC Championship, NFC Championship were a few weeks ago, where the Chiefs beat the Baltimore Ravens. Kansas City Chiefs beat the Baltimore Ravens, and the Detroit Lions lost to the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship. And the differences between those two games, obviously, I felt the hurt for Lions fans because being up that much. I think they were up. Was it 21-3, or I think, yeah, it was 21-3, and they obviously had a chance to almost score. And I think later on, the fourth down risk that the Dan Campbell chose to take, because he chose to live by who he was and the culture he has cultivated for his team and the franchise. So really seeing how that, was, they had a chance to obviously tie the game, but instead, go for it on fourth down, and eventually, obviously they lose by 3. Let me pull up the exact score. But yeah, them choosing, to go for it on fourth down and really cost themselves the game. And how they, you know, and honestly, I felt like it was almost like this was the Detroit Lions year, in terms of when I saw them go up and they were, blowing out the explosive 49ers team, and then the momentum just swung and back in the favor of 49ers, and eventually 49ers eventually, got that win. And then in terms of the Chiefs-Ravens game, which was I'm obviously, a fan of both quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, but seeing, Lamar do his best to try to overcome that Chiefs defense, which has been such a staple for them all season. As much as, we talk about Patrick Mahomes and that offense and kind of what they've been doing this playoffs, but that defense, being consistent, and really being, a greater version of themselves, as a team. So it'll be, and feeling for Lamar, and I think Roquan Smith talked about not making excuses and knowing they didn't play their best ball obviously that day, and how they choose to move forward. But we have an exciting Super Bowl on our hands. Super Bowl 58 in Las Vegas between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers in Vegas this weekend in Allegiant Stadium. Is going to be a great battle. And in terms of like my prediction for that game, oh man, I mean, it's hard to bet against Patrick Mahomes. I think the Chiefs, not discrediting Brock Purdy, although I have always felt, I mean, Brock stepped up in that NFC Championship game, where he needed to make the plays that he needed to make, because I always felt he was kind of a game manager quarterback. But really seeing, how he carried his team, and how how he'll come out, in the Super Bowl is going to be interesting, going from a, Mr. Irrelevant to, being, the guy on the biggest stage, so it'll be a great, be a fun Super Bowl. As far as who I'm choosing, I got to go with the Chiefs. I think it'll be a close game, but I think that Chiefs defense contains that explosive Niners offense, and I think the Chiefs kind of pull away, in the fourth quarter, and it kind of starts to pull away from it. And I think it'll be 31-17 Kansas City. I feel like it's going to be, kind of early on, but I think the Chiefs kind of pull late, and Patrick Mahomes pulls off that Patty Mahomes magic that we always see. So I have the Chiefs, winning the Super Bowl. And, obviously, a second, rematch between these two teams. But like I said, I think I have the Chiefs, pulling it out. And I guess before I wrap up, I'll get into, my top 4 for this week. Start off with my favorite album or favorite kind of music I've been listening to of late. Honestly, I don't know if I've had like one specific song or kind of artist or album that I've been listening to of late. I've still kind of been on my, different playlists that I have. I think the latest I've been listening to most recently is probably my my recently played playlist that has kind of my favorite songs that obviously I've been recently playing and recently listening to, and kind of my top 25 playlist as well. of my most recently played songs as well. And so I've been listening to that. Favorite show to watch. I was at I was talking before last episode about I had finished up House of Lies, or I was watching House of Lies, and then I finished that up, and that was a great show. And then I started. I think this show has entered my top 5 all time show, and that's Weeds. Weeds is, I mean, the story, the relatability. I think it's funny enough that I opened up this episode on accountability, but how the character Nancy Botwin, played by Mary Louise Parker, and how she's trying to cultivate this lifestyle for her family after the loss of her husband, after the sudden loss of her husband, and obviously the route she chooses to go into, and understanding the risks that come with it. Really, the trauma she's placed on her kids because of the lifestyle she chose to, indulge in, and get into the drug game. And Weeds is just thrilling, really well-rounded show, from the storytelling to the acting to the nuanced layers of the show, that just really you're able to capture different parts of yourself through each character. Was very, it was an incredible watch, and I think that's why I think I said top 5, but I think it's really my top 3 of all time shows, TV shows. Obviously, number 1 being Breaking Bad, 2 being The Wire, 3 being Weeds, I think, 4 Entourage, and then 5 Curb Your Enthusiasm. And those, and obviously that list is probably going to change and evolve as we go moving forward. And then what do I have currently going on? A lot of ideating, a lot of self-evaluation, a lot of examining myself, and who I'm becoming, who I want to become. You know, as far as kind of work, figuring out career growth, and really just being a better kind of version of myself overall, that I was kind of talk about, really being more accountable, in the choices I choose to make, and really just getting better, like I said earlier, that 1% better. And then what I'm looking forward to, and I think it's a lot I'm looking forward to, the trips that I don't want to speak on too early yet. As we'll get closer, I'll touch on them. But the trips that I have, moving forward, that I'm excited about, that are work related, the ones that I'm currently still trying to figure out, that I've put aside, that's personal, that I want to make happen. And then looking forward to I think the people I've been surrounding myself with and around, and learning from those individuals, and in terms of what can I gain about myself from those encounters and those experiences, and the different books. So just really looking forward to just expanding on my curiosity, my thirst for learning and getting better. So those are kind of the things I'm excited about, and looking forward to. As I mentioned before, the events that I attended, and the events that I will attend moving forward. I'm excited about, and what that allows for me to learn about myself is always going to be interesting. And then, as always, I appreciate you guys for just taking the time to listen. This was always therapeutic for me, in a sense of just really regardless of who's listening or not, just talking to you guys, and really giving you guys, different aspects of, kind of what goes into my mind and, how I connected to the different things I love and enjoy. So as always, appreciate you guys joining me, on another episode of, the Mo Love Podcast, honest conversations with Mo. And as always, peace and, look forward to another one.